Hello, good morning. So what were we doing in the last class? We were talking about India-Nepal relations. And did we talk about the nature of this relationship? And did I give you an assignment? So how many of you actually bothered to complete the assignment? क्या assignment दिया था? Please look at the atlas. Major rivers between India and Nepal. देखा आपने? कौन बताएगा? कोई है बताने वाला? हाँ प्लीज वॉलंटियर्स. काली, करनाली, घाघरा, गंडक, बूढ़ी गंडक, कमला कोसी, महानंदा, अरुण, राप्ती, सारा नाम ले दो. मेजर रिवर सिस्टम्स. सो आपने कहा कि घाघरा. डू वी हैव एनी रिवर बाय द नेम ऑफ घाघरा इन नेपाल? सरयू. डू वी हैव एनी रिवर बाय द नेम ऑफ सरयू इन नेपाल? इंडिया में उसको बोलते हैं, क्या बोलते हैं? So my aim was that you at least look at the atlas which you have done. So primary task is complete. So the river Mahakali in India is known by the name of Sharda. All right. And then Karnali in Nepal is known by the name of Ghaghra in India. When Sharda and Ghaghra meet, that stream flows as Ghaghra. All right, and that is a major tributary of which river basin? Ganges. All right, and of course, river Gandak is Narayani in Nepal. Narayani, major rivers. I said major rivers. And then you have Sapta Kosi, which becomes Kosi in India, and then the Gandak stream with its various names. These are major rivers. Major rivers. I'm not saying that other rivers are not there, but these are major rivers. So basically the idea is that you don't need to remember everything, but what is majorly commonly known is something that you should not miss out. No matter what anyone says, this examination is not about special facts. This examination is for graduates, general studies. So first thing, don't miss out on the general fact, right? In order to, or at the cost of focusing on specific or special facts. ये basically लोग करने लगते हैं exam में. So that is one suggestion that I will give to you. And it is good that you have seen the paper. And what is it that we talked about the nature of India-Nepal relations? How is the relation? हाँ? Sometime good, sometime bad. Life, ये तो पूरी life है. और what else? Special relations. So why is India-Nepal relation a special relation? सोचना शुरू कीजिए, because my task is also to make you think. I don't believe that any of you is not capable of thinking, any one of you does not have the intellect. जोर से. लिंकेज ऑफ बुद्धा, इन्होंने कह दिया लिंकेज ऑफ बुद्धा. उसको लिंकेजेस ऑफ बुद्धिज्म कह सकते हैं. ओके. All right, what else? Common culture. जैसे मतलब आपने बता दिया, आप एग्जाम्पल दीजिए. एग्जाम में भी यही करेंगे. When you are stating something, it is ideal that you provide an example. So that's how it becomes concrete. कहानी सबको पता है. आज के जमाने में कहानी सबको पता है. There is no requirement of visa. All right, so that's why it is special relations. But I had said that this is a relationship which has significant potential, but it is also a relationship which is of unfulfilled potential. All right? Do you remember this? That there is a relationship which has potential, but it is of unfulfilled potential. And we can also say that India-Nepal relationship is special, but it is also marked by periodic frictions. So that is the nature of this relationship. Other views on this relationship are that sometimes in Nepal, the perception is that the relationship is one way. Sometimes in Nepal, the perception is that India interferes in their domestic politics. So we say perception, it is a perception. We don't say in the examination that this is what India does, right? So we remain tentative. And then we can also say that, for example, Ambassador Shyam Saran says that India's engagement with Nepal has been at times episodic, meaning there has been a lack of regularity in terms of interactions between these countries. So that these are all views on the nature of the relation. कोई universal truth की बात नहीं कर रहे हैं, but how different people look at this relationship. So there are some factors that you would not miss out about this relationship, that it is a special relationship. It is a special relationship born out by the fact that we have cultural and civilizational linkages. We share a common geography, including a long border and transboundary rivers. It is a special relationship because of the interactions going beyond the government. So it is a special relationship because of factors like people-to-people ties. It is a special relationship because elements such as trade and economic engagements bear it out. So trade and economic engagements have also been close. It is a special relationship because there has been a consistent attempt after periods of friction to engage with Nepal. ऐसा नहीं है कि एक बार friction हो गया so we let go of this relationship. We consistently make an attempt to engage with Nepal. It is a special relationship because Nepal shares a border not only with India but also with China. It is a special relationship because we share common ecological space. Many Indian states are Himalayan states. Nepal is a Himalayan country. So that's what I'm saying, that after all these lectures, these are the ways in which you should start thinking about any relationship. There is nothing beyond this in any relationship. You pick up a simple element of geography, you understand the importance of the relationship. You look at a simple map and you can talk about the nature of relationship, right? The nature of relationship. Now, when we are talking about India-Nepal relations, let's simply try and start with a map of India and Nepal, if possible. Let me see whether my technology proficiency allows me to do that. Hopefully it opens up. If it doesn't open up, someone will come. All right, so we'll see a map of Nepal. Let's start by looking at different aspects of this relationship. All right, the different aspects of this relationship, meaning by now you should be familiar with how to make structure of any relationship. So when we look at India-Nepal relations, first realization should be what is a phrase or a jargon that I can use to describe this relationship, because most of you are stuck at the level of introduction. कैसे introduce करते हैं? So simply introduce करते हैं किसी भी चीज को. Introduction is not the complete answer. It is only the starting point. So don't, at the beginning at least, don't be stuck at the level of introduction. कि मेरा best introduction होगा तभी मैं आगे का answer लिखूंगा या लिखूंगी. All right? और उसके बाद ही अच्छा होगा. So just have a simple framework. So we simply said that this is a special relationship. So now once we have done that, since the relations from Pakistan, we have been doing this. That once we know the nature of relationship, we try to know how and why. Why can we say that this is a special relationship? So what are the elements? So first of all, shared geography should come to your mind if that is the case in any relationship. Shared geography. Geography simply becomes location in international relation. So what does it amount to? It may amount to a shared border. All right. So India and Nepal share a 1850 kilometer long border. This should be simple for you. Now the next consideration is which states in India share a border with Nepal? States in India sharing a border with Nepal. So you should know your country better than the other country, right? So Uttarakhand, Uttar Pradesh, Bihar, West Bengal and Sikkim, right? So that should be clear to you. So that is both some sort of fact that you can use as a starting point in your mains answer. कुछ नहीं है तो इससे शुरू कर दिया, and then that can also help you in case there is a question on India Nepal of this nature in using this information for that kind of a purpose. Now this also means shared transboundary rivers, transboundary. अब एग्जाम्पल दे दो. Mahakali in India is known as Sharda, Karnali, Ghagra. Then you have Gandak and Narayani. Then you have Saptakosi, Kosi, Gandak. All right. So these are the ways in which you should think about any relationship. Shared transboundary river. Simple. Shared transboundary river, shared geography also means that we have cultural and civilizational interactions. No factor is inferior or superior as compared to other. These are different ways of talking about a relationship. Simple. So in IR the purpose is for the examination. जिनको आगे का इंटरेस्ट है वो जिंदगी भर पढ़ते रहेंगे IR. So the purpose is to diversify your answer as much as possible. Diverse aspects of any issue as much as possible, and this is where the diversity comes from. So cultural and civilizational linkages, which translates also into people to people ties. All right, so what is the example? Cultural and civilization linkages means shared values and customs, shared religious practices, shared places of pilgrimage. All right, that is basically the meaning of shared cultural and civilizational space. People to people ties, there is a regular movement of people from both sides. So 6 to 9 million Nepalese citizens live and work in India, different estimates. 6 to 9 million Nepalese citizens live and work in India. 600,000 Indians are domiciled or are residents of Nepal. That is the meaning of people to people ties, right? So that's basically either describing any relationship or providing any solution. This is where it comes from. The fundamentals of any relationship. This is where it comes from. What is the other element that makes it special? What is the other element that makes it special? So there we can give example of what are the outstanding areas of cooperation. What are the outstanding areas of cooperation? So outstanding areas of cooperation, we will find close economic linkages between India and Nepal. Economic linkages. All right. We have close defense ties. Close economic linkages, close defense ties. And also, we understand that fairly regular political and diplomatic engagements. All right. So, for example, we have first of all a treaty of friendship dating back to 1950. That is the first political act, diplomatic act that made this relationship or that created a framework for special relationship. उठा लीजिए, कोई शर्माने की बात नहीं है. That is the first political and diplomatic act to create a framework for special relations between India and Nepal. Treaty of Friendship 1950. And then you have other meaning of political diplomatic engagement is visits, high level visits. So there have been gaps, but still we will find many examples of high level visits. For example, 2022, Prime Minister of Nepal was in India. April, May का समय याद करो. Prime Minister of Nepal was in India and Prime Minister of India visited Nepal. So that is also the meaning of what are the political and diplomatic engagement. Is there a dialogue? Is there a visit that we can talk about? That is the meaning of it. So बहुत सारे relations में एक list होगी visits की. That is not to be remembered. That only gives you an example that whether interactions have been fairly regular or not. So for example, with Pakistan, we can clearly say that interactions have not been fairly regular. Right? With most of the other countries, we can say that the interactions between India and that country have been fairly regular. And similarly, there are bodies like Joint Commission, India-Nepal Joint Commission, India-Nepal Joint Commission, which is basically a platform where foreign ministers of both sides meet and review the, as it is said, entire gamut of relations. Whatever issues are there in the relationship, the progress is assessed at the level of India-Nepal Joint Commission meeting. India-Nepal Joint Commission meeting first started in the year 1987. All right, 1987. So that is basically a simple framework for any relationship. This is the starting point. If you know this, then you can construct your answer. These are the kinds of elements that you should have your eye on. If there is a visit, of course, people would be writing articles in the newspaper. मैं ऐसा नहीं कह सकता कि जैसे आपने बहुत लोग कहते हैं इतना काफ़ी है, मैं ऐसा नहीं कह सकता कि मैंने आज जो पढ़ाया उसके बाद पढ़ना बंद कर दो. ऑलराइट, मैं ऐसा नहीं कह सकता कि मैं जो पढ़ा रहा हूँ और कोई नहीं बता सकता तुमको. नहीं, ऐसा नहीं है. इट इज़ इन द पब्लिक डोमेन. And regularity is what would be required. Once you have understood the structure and requirement, the teacher is telling you that itna pad liya, so you are in the right direction. That is the only thing that I can tell you. I cannot tell you where the world ends. All right? Or what is the limit of the universe? I can't tell you because I don't know. So whenever there is a visit, for example, it is an example of political diplomatic health of a relationship. Whenever there is a visit, there would be an agreement. Agreement regarding what? Discussion regarding what? These areas. Right? So things would become examples here. So that's why you read newspapers. You see whether there has been a new announcement. If there is a characteristically new announcement, fundamentally significant new announcement, you make a note of it. That becomes your value addition over people who would be sitting and thinking कि नहीं इतना कर लिया बस इतना काफ़ी है, आज के बाद पढ़ना नहीं है ना. जैसे स्कूल में जब रहे होगे, जो फाइनल क्लास 12th एग्जाम दिया होगा, so there were certain subjects with whom you did not have much of a good relation, so you must have thought कि आज के बाद नहीं पढ़ना पड़ेगा. That was a fallacy. It never happens. All right. If you have to grow, you have to continue engaging with all kinds of subjects. Right. So that is what I will suggest. And then people write in the newspaper. People who have better information, retired ambassadors or academicians. So they would be writing. So you read them for opinions, views. What happens through this process? What you already know is consolidated. जो आपको पहले से पता है, that is repeated and consolidated. Then when you are reading, you know the broad areas. From there, an anecdote, a story or a fact can be mentioned by someone else. So something new is added. That is what happens. So once you have learned something, repeat it. And through that repetition comes addition and consolidation. This is the process of preparation. Learn, repeat, apply, learn, repeat, apply. ये करते रहना है कब तक? जब तक PDF में नाम नहीं आ जाए. Final PDF में, है ना? So that is something that you have to keep in mind. So that's the idea. Now, हाँ बिल्कुल, मैंने मेंशन नहीं किया था कि पिछली क्लास में. बिल्कुल मेंशन कर सकते हैं आप. मैंने कहा कि because this is why it is called a close relationship. Some people will call रोटी बेटी का रिश्ता. मुझे पर्सनली इस तरह के फ्रेजेस पसंद नहीं है आंसर में, बट जनरली इसका फैशन है, तो आप बिल्कुल लिख सकते हैं. इसलिए मैं मिस आउट नहीं करता, मैंने बता दिया. ऑल राइट, यू कैन सिंपली ऑल्सो स्टेट सर्टन थिंग्स और यू कैन यूज जार्गन्स और फ्रेजेस लाइक रोटी बेटी का रिश्ता. डेफिनेटली यू कैन डू दैट. दैट्स व्हाट आई एम सेइंग. तो वो बहुत पुराना हो गया, बहुत सारे लोग लिखेंगे, केवल आप नहीं लिखेंगे, बहुत सारे लोग लिखेंगे. तो इसलिए अगली बार कोई नया एम्बेसडर, जैसे एम्बेसडर राकेश सूद या एम्बेसडर श्याम सरन या प्रोफेसर डॉक्टर सी राजा मोहन राइट्स एन आर्टिकल, वहां से आपको और नए फ्रेजेस मिल सकते हैं. यही आइडिया है बस. जैसे एक रोटी बेटी का रिश्ता एक आइडिया हो गया, हो सकता है आगे आप कोई और बेटर आइडिया ले आए. अगर आप अखबार पढ़ रहे हैं तो बिल्कुल कह सकते हैं. मैं कभी मना नहीं करूंगा कि ये कह नहीं सकते. अगर आपको लगता है इट इज रीजनेबल, से इट. राइट? Because ultimately you are responsible citizens, na? You have the right to vote, you have the right to become a civil servant, appear in the UPSC examination. How can I say that you are not thinking on the right lines? Now let's go to the next level of analysis. So first, descriptive features of any relationship. Second, when we go to analysis, we try and find out issues. What are the issues in India-Nepal relations? What are the issues? And issues would also come from here. All right? Issues would also come from here. So if we see broadly what kind of interactions is there between countries. Remember the first lecture, what kind of interaction is there between countries? First of all, every country is here to save its national interest. Nobody is there to save your national interest, including India. If there is convergence, what happens? पहले क्लास में पढ़ाया था शायद मैंने आपको. Cooperation happens. If there is divergence, what happens? Either contention or it may lead to conflict, but competition is always there. So increasing cooperation, managing competition, preventing conflict is what countries are doing generally. So then from any issue area, either there can be examples of cooperation or there can be examples where there is a lack of cooperation or there can be examples where there is active contention. ऐसा ही हो सकता है. Simple पैटर्न ऑफ रिलेशनशिप समझने की कोशिश करनी है आपको. देयर इज नो रॉकेट साइंस हियर. एंड आई होप दैट इतना धीरे तो हम आए हैं कि वो लिखने की जिद के अलावा ये भी समझ गए आप कि आपको हर रिलेशन को ऐसे देखना है. सो देन वी आइडेंटिफाई इफ द इश्यूज आर आइडेंटिफाइड. यस, देयर आर पॉलिटिकल इश्यूज बिटवीन इंडिया एंड नेपाल. इफ वी हैव अ शेयर्ड ज्योग्राफी, वी हैव इश्यूज रिलेटेड विथ बॉर्डर एंड वी हैव इश्यूज रिलेटेड विथ rivers. All right? And then we also have issues which can be seen as larger issues of strategy. Strategic issues in this relationship mainly comes from the fact that China, now a powerful neighbor of India, is also keen on expanding its influence in India's neighborhood. So that is where the issues come from. Now moving on, let's talk about these issues. So first of all, when we look at the issue of political and diplomatic engagements, so at the broadest level, all issues are ultimately discussed by politicians or diplomats, all right, at the broadest level. But when we look at the pattern of these engagements, what we'll find is that in different phases, there has been an attempt to form a closer partnership by both sides. So that is a simple idea that in different phases, there has been a constant attempt to form a closer partnership between these two sides. That's the case. That's the case. Now, we also understand that in different phases, there have been frictions, right? So, we find the behavior to be there, attempts for cooperation. So it has always been the endeavor in this relationship by both sides to develop closer relations. And it is also a fairly known fact that there have been periodic frictions. Both are true. Attempts for cooperation, fairly easy to understand because both of them share borders. Both of them have common economic and people-to-people linkages. Both of them have shared attributes of transboundary rivers. So, of course, there would be an element of cooperation in this relationship. They have tried to build on that. Frictions generally are in news. सबको मजा आता है war के बारे में बात करने में, सबको मजा आता है weapons के बारे में बात करने में, है ना? सबसे ज्यादा मजा लोगों को इसी चीज में आता है. IR का मतलब क्या होता है? टैंक्स, प्लेन्स, आर्मी, इसने इसको ये कर दिया. बट इट इज ऑल्सो अ फेयरली बोरिंग प्रोसेस. पूरी लाइफ अगर एक्साइटिंग हो जाएगी, इतनी एनर्जी नहीं बचेगी आपके पास. सो एक्साइटमेंट इज देयर, बट देयर इज ऑल्सो द बोरिंग पार्ट. ऑल राइट. सो देयर हैव बीन फ्रिक्शंस. सो and also understand, in any relationship it is fairly common to have all the elements together. Cooperation is there, friction is there, all right? So focusing on any one is not the solution. You should have a holistic view. So first of all, periodic friction. So periodic friction has come due to historic transitions. Historic transitions. Mainly political and generational shifts. These are the reasons. They have been the source of friction between India and Nepal. What does this mean? Let's simply understand. So then you can bring in any period of history and you will find that ultimately whenever there is a change, जब भी change हो रहा है, so it is a time when there would be problems. All right. So if we look at the relation in the British period, we inherited many of the arrangements in this relationship from the British period. And how did the Britishers view Nepal? The Britishers viewed Nepal as a buffer state, not independent India, but British, the Britishers. So just remember that there would be continuity. Britishers ruled India and they also engaged with our neighbors, and that is the genesis of our neighborhood relations in modern times. But independent India chose to have different kinds of relations. So in the British period you will find what is happening in the 19th century, that Nepal is getting consolidated under the Shah dynasty. The Shah rulers of Nepal are consolidating Nepal. And in that period what you will find is that there are excursions from Nepal. Nepal's military reaches till places like Himachal Pradesh. So today's Uttarakhand or Himachal Pradesh are places where we find that Nepal's military or Nepal's rulers had expanded their influence. And then the Britishers fought with them multiple wars or battles. So Britishers in a way militarily prevailed over the rulers of Nepal. So that is how Nepal as we see it today in terms of its territorial configuration came into existence. I'm not saying Nepal was created by Britishers, I'm saying its territory as we see today. So the Britishers defeated Nepal, and then what they did, they allowed Nepal to retain its independence. So Nepal was never a part of India. Culturally, civilizationally, we can think of commonalities, but Nepal was not a part of India in the modern sense. So then, as an idea of treating Nepal as a buffer state, what the Britishers did was, they signed treaties with Nepal. And the aim of that treaty was to delineate some sort of border between India and Nepal, what the Britishers controlled, what the Nepalese controlled. And the treaties also then were about such arrangements where the Britishers offered financial inducements, assistance to Nepal, and in return guaranteed that they retained influence over the foreign and defense policy of Nepal. That is what the Britishers did with Bhutan, that is what the Britishers did with Afghanistan, that is what the Britishers did with Nepal. Right? They wanted a space surrounding India which was not ruled by any strong government. Right? So weaker kingdoms, weaker governments providing territorial space through which Britain can mount the defense of India. That was its idea. Britain did not want to share India with anyone. So it allowed, so that's the template. It allowed their independence, it recognized their independence, rule your domain, but in your foreign and defense policy, we would have a say. We will provide you financial assistance. That is something that the Britishers did. So, many of the issues are issues dating back to the British period. The conception of border, for example, the contention arises because of the conceptualization of that in the British period. So, India carried out the special element of relationship after independence. But we signed a Treaty of Friendship, 1950. Right? Treaty of Friendship 1950 was signed between India and Nepal. So what is India doing? India is saying that we recognize Nepal is a Himalayan country and Himalaya is always the first consideration in India's defense preparedness. So thereby good relations with Nepal are always required. Right? It is in our interest. So we formalized special relationship by signing a treaty when we became independent. But that does not mean that we carried on with the views that the Britishers had. But the influence was there. So in 1950, when we signed Treaty of Peace, Friendship, Cooperation with Nepal, it is happening in a particular context. Nepal is witnessing a transition. Transition of what sorts? So Nepal has a monarchy, but Nepal also has a hereditary system of prime ministers, Rana Shahi as it is called. So there is a tussle between monarchy and the Ranas. Ranas, who are the prime ministers of Nepal, Shah dynasty rules Nepal. So the real power is with the prime ministers and the monarchy is the head of the state, at the head of the state. So here what we see is that it seems that India in some ways assisted the monarchy in prevailing over the Rana Shahi, right? So Nepal's king for a brief while came to India. He was given shelter in India, and then India played an important role in creating some sort of understanding between the Ranas and the monarchy. So after the treaty, India in a way is seen to be backing the monarch. Rana Shahi is abolished. Alright, the Rana Shahi system is abolished in Nepal. So then what happens? India also is keen that Nepal accommodates some of the democratic elements in its society. Where is this democratic element coming from? So in the British period also, a lot of Nepalese families used to send their children for education in India. India was the closest large country, so it is fairly common that many of the elites from Nepal studied in India, and many also participated in movements like Quit India movement, 1942, right? For example, the Koirala family, BP Koirala, Girija Prasad Koirala, these are some of the important names in Nepal's politics. So even these people had close relations with the leadership of independent India. So India helped them also getting accommodated in the political system. So panchayat system is established in Nepal. Some sort of a representative framework of governance is established in deference to democratic aspirations in Nepal. So now if you see, all sorts of elites in Nepal have close relations with India. The royal family has relations of marriage in India, hai na? Right? For example, the Scindia family in India has marital ties with the royal family in Nepal. The erstwhile royal family of Jammu and Kashmir, Dr. Karan Singh and his family has familial ties in Nepal. Hai na? Similarly, the Ranas also have familial ties with India. Similarly, those who were educated in India and aspired for democracy. India became a democracy. So they also wanted that Nepal should also modernize and become a democracy. They have also connections with India. So India has engagements or linkages with all sections of Nepal's society. And there is a domestic contention for power always. So each of these sections seeks India's help to pursue its interests. And that is where invariably India becomes embroiled in the domestic politics of Nepal. One or the other section would accuse India of interfering in their politics. If we are seen to be close to monarchy, then other elements, the traditional elements, would get annoyed. If we are seen too close with democracy, the monarchy would get annoyed. So that is basically what I mean by historic transitions, political and generational. So first of all, we see that in each of these phases, Nepal's elites has its own contentions. Each of these elites have close relations with India, and they, in a way, expect India's assistance. So thereby, indirectly, India becomes linked with domestic political developments in Nepal. All right, 1950, when we signed the Treaty of Peace, Friendship and Cooperation, is a period of transition from power with the Rana Shahi to power with the monarchy. And India assisted the monarchs to prevail over the Ranas. But it does not mean that Ranas were the enemies. But this is what India did. But India also, in some senses, advised Nepal to accommodate democratic aspirations of the younger generation, those who were influenced by India. So the monarch got angry. So initially panchayat system was established, but when monarch consolidated his power, nobody likes anybody else to control them. So the panchayat system was abolished and the system of appointments in the courts of the Nepal's monarch starts. Meaning Nepalese monarchy starts consolidating its power. And thereby what you would see is that there has always been an attempt to play the China card, which does not mean anything. Don't get angry. Anyone will do that. It means that just as there is India, China is also a choice for some political elite in Nepal. Right? So that if you don't help us, we will get close to China. So that is what we'll see, 50s, 60s, China helping Nepal in construction of some highways. So interaction between Nepal and China also had started at that point in time. But in the 1960s, what happens is India and China go to a war and India gets serious. So India sends its members of its armed forces to Nepal. There is deployment in Nepal also of the armed forces, especially in the border areas. And India wants assurance from Nepal that it would support India, certainly not support China. Right? So that is a period in which you will see again Nepal and India getting close, where Nepal differs to India's sensitivity regarding China. But again, there is a dislike for the fact that there is some sort of pressure from India. So again, after a while, what you will see, some transition happens. So what is that transition? In the 1980s, there is a democratic movement in Nepal, Loktantrik movement as it is called, Loktantrik movement 1. So what are these people demanding? These people are demanding restoration of parliamentary system, all right? Some sort of parliamentary system. They are not saying abolition of monarchy. They are saying that there should be some mechanism for representation in Nepal's politics for accommodating popular aspirations. So India then is seen to have supported the Loktantrik 1 movement. How do we support it? We basically convey to the monarch that you should, in your own interest, accommodate the demands of democratic representation. And thereby what you would see is the monarchs also reassert themselves. So 1989, there is a friction in relations again. It is said that India, in support of the democratic elements, put pressure on Nepal. It is said, it is argued, it is certainly a matter of perception that there was a blockade on the border. So that is another friction. When Nepal is moving from monarchy to a democracy in some senses. So that is the another prominent place where there is friction. जो भी पढ़ने में इंटरेस्टेड होगा, पहला पार्ट क्या होता है आपके चैप्टर का? हिस्ट्री ऑफ द रिलेशनशिप. आई एम ओनली प्रोवाइडिंग यू द फ्रेमवर्क. So 1989 and early 1990s, there is another friction where India is found to be forced to choose between the monarchy and the democratic element in Nepal. And then there is also domestic transition in Nepal. So domestic transition in the third sense is, by 1995, Nepal plunges into a domestic insurgency, the rise of the Maoist in Nepal. So 1995 onwards, Nepal is facing another transition, which is Maoist insurgency. Maoists start challenging the Nepalese state, challenging the authority of the monarchy. ये होता है. All right. So in this period also, what you will see is there is close cooperation between India and Nepal in terms of security. All right, because India has its own left-wing insurgency, left-wing extremism, as it is called. So because there are common security consideration, there is a cooperation. And India is a statist country. We would always support the integrity and sovereignty of any country. We would not support any rebel element. So we are seen to be cooperating with the monarchy. And then Nepal plunges into another crisis. 2001. A tragic story plays out in Nepal. Nepal's crown prince is in love with somebody. The family does not want him to get married with that person. So it is said that the crown prince of Nepal picked up automatic weapons and killed the entire royal family, including the king, the queen, the other princes. मुझे भी कहानी बता दिया करिए आप, आपस में बात कर रहे हैं. So there is a royal family massacre in 2001. Royal family massacre. So just at the time when Nepal is already facing challenges, Maoist insurgency, there are differences between Democrats and Royalists. Nepal's royal family itself faces that crisis, royal massacre. The entire royal family is killed in one night, right? The crown prince, it is said, killed his father, mother, brothers and sisters, and also ultimately killed himself. So now there is a transition within monarchy. So the next king is the younger brother of King Birendra, called Prince Gyanendra. All right. So the ascension of King Gyanendra to the throne is accompanied by a assertion of democratic elements in Nepal. Democratic elements wants greater share in power. So that is happening. So it is a period when there is a tussle between political parties in Nepal and monarchy. 2001 onwards, what we will see is a tussle between those who are smart, थोड़ा थोड़ा लिख भी ले रहे हैं, tussle between monarchy and democracy, right? 2001 onwards. So now in this period, what happens? India is engaging with Nepal, and there is always a risk that it would be seen to be interfering or siding with one or the other. And that is what happens. So we are talking, first of all, we want stability and stable transition in our neighborhood. So that is our concern. So we advise the monarch to accommodate the democratic aspirations, right? Open up more, move towards a constitutional monarchy, because sooner or later change would happen. That is very clear. So one model is Bhutan. Bhutan or Bhutanese royal family was wise in the sense that it sensed the change in time. So Bhutan became a constitutional monarchy in the first decade of 21st century. Nepal it did not happen. So the tussle between monarchy and the democrats continued. The political parties in Nepal continued. And then by 2005, the Maoists surrender. So there is one chapter which closes in Nepal. The Maoists surrender in 2005. And the Maoists and the political parties in Nepal join hands. They sign a comprehensive peace agreement. And it is said that India facilitated that peace agreement between the Maoists and the political parties in Nepal. So again, for the monarchy, India is siding with those who are opposing it. And when India is talking to the monarch, there is also a perception among the democrats that India is not completely siding with them, but is siding with the monarchy. So there is a matter of perception. India has relations with all these sections of society in Nepal, and all the elites in Nepal would like India to favor them or support them. And India would like to engage with all for maintaining stability in the region. So be that as it may, by 2007, what happens is there is quick movement in Nepal. King Gyanendra is deposed. The political parties in Nepal, including the Maoists, move towards the formation of the first constituent assembly. There are elections in Nepal, first constituent assembly, and this constituent assembly then takes upon itself to form the constitution. Right? So by 2007, Nepal declares abolition of monarchy and the process of framing a constitution, that Nepal is going to move towards framing a constitution. And यहाँ पे भी problem solve नहीं होती है, because there is a lack of clear majority in the constituent assembly, so it is always based on coalitions, right? So coalition between the Maoists, coalition between the Nepalese Congress, coalition between smaller groups like the Madhesi political parties. So this is what is happening. So then what we would see is there is a quick succession in terms of prime ministers in Nepal, right? Even in the Constituent Assembly period, there is power tussle. There is lack of consensus in Nepal's Constituent Assembly. From 2008 to 2010, it was supposed that 2 years would be sufficient for Constituent Assembly to come up with a new constitution. But by 2010, there was no constitution in place. Constituent Assembly extended its tenure by another 2 years. But again, in this 2 year also, what we will see is a lack of consensus among different political groups. So thereby the same story continues. A revolving game of chairs. Who is the Prime Minister? Who would form the government? By 2012, the Constituent Assembly again decides to extend its tenure. But by this time, the Supreme Court in Nepal says nothing happening. You cannot extend your time frame anymore. Constituent Assembly now has 2 years to form the constitution. So a second Constituent Assembly, as we can say, is in place, which had the task of framing the constitution between 2013 to 2015. Constituent Assembly. So the constitution making process continues 2007 onwards. By 2015, again, 2013, the second Constituent Assembly comes into existence. By 2015, 2 years, there is no constitution in place. तो फिर से काम नहीं हुआ. All right? काम क्या है? Constitution बनाना. Constitution बन रहा है अभी. बन पाया नहीं है. Of course, there is a lack of consensus. This is what we call transition, political and historic transition in Nepal. So then what happens? 2015, 3 things happen. 2015 is a clear example of recent frictions between India and Nepal. That's the most important year that you should refer to from the contemporary perspective. That's the most recent example. बाकी तो history में हो गया, तो हमने pattern देखा there whenever there is historical and political transition in Nepal from monarchy or tussle between monarchy and Rana Shahi or tussle between the royalists, supporter of monarchy and Democrats, there has been a friction. Why? Simple, because of entanglements of India in the domestic politics of Nepal. ये simple fact है जो आपको समझना है, ऐसा होता है. Now, 2015 what happened? So again, Nepal is in transition and it's been a long period of transition. Governments in Nepal have been changing on the basis of changing coalition in the Constituent Assembly. It is also acting as the parliament, right? So then by 2015 there is enough time which has passed and there is no constitution. So what is happening? 2015, in the month of April, there is an earthquake in Nepal. It's a devastating earthquake. I remember I was also in the bordering regions at that point in time and I felt the earthquake. So the earthquake was devastating. Infrastructure in Nepal, Kathmandu Valley was destroyed. So then after the destruction, the question is who would ensure the reconstruction? And then there is a donors conference in the month of July, International Donors Conference in the month of July of 2015. International community comes together to formulate some sort of support for Nepal. So then when somebody is giving you a money, they would also like to know how the money would be spent. So there was a focus on governance. So earthquake causes destruction and there is already a prevailing anger because of political instability. So then there is popular pressure also. People are fed up. And then there is also an international expectation that Nepal expedites the process of making its constitution. All right. So that's where in 2015 things come to pass. So in 2015, Nepal in the month of September declares adoption of a new constitution. So this is basically the year in which Nepal adopted its new constitution. So adoption of constitution by Nepal is in general a welcome step. All right. But here we see that this episode also marks a friction in India-Nepal relations. How so? So, first of all, when the constitution of Nepal was adopted, there was considerable opposition to certain provisions in the constitution or the nature of the constitution domestically. So in Nepal, there were contentions over the provisions of the constitution. So the issue is not resolved even there. And where is this opposition coming from? So for example, there are groups in Nepal, right? Like Madhesis. Who are the Madhesis? Madhesis are the largest ethnic community in Nepal. Largest ethnic community in Nepal. They live on the plains in Nepal, in the plain region, Terai as it is called, the Terai region. That is where they are ordinarily residents. So thereby they have close cross-border linkages, familial ties, marriage ties with people in India. Some people in Nepal say that Madhesis are people of Indian origin, but Madhesis would say that no, we are the original residents of Nepal, right? There is commonality of religion, commonality of caste system, commonality of practices, right? So Madhesis, largest ethnic group in Nepal, they are not happy. And then there are groups like Janajatis, as they are called, Tharus. Where would you find the Tharus in India? Paschimi Champaran, in the Tarai region, right? In that whole Tarai belt, Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, right? Not only in Paschimi Champaran, but in the Tarai region. Tharu is also a tribe in India. So communities, smaller communities, larger communities, Madhesis, Janajatis, and the Tharu, these kind of communities are not happy with the provision for representation in Nepal's constitution, right? So they are not happy with the provisions for representation in Nepal's constitution. And they want adequate changes. Similarly, there is also the question on the federal nature of the state, what would be the shape of or territorial configuration of the new provinces, right? Where would be the capitals, so on and so forth. So on the question of representation, on the question of the federal structure, there are differences. There were also minor differences in terms of what would be the nature of the state, whether it would be a secular state or Nepal was the only Hindu monarchy before the constitution came into place. So there were contentions among different groups on many issues. And what happened was there were also demonstrations in Nepal against some provisions in the constitution, demonstrations. So then things are moving towards confrontation. And India then advises Nepal to consider and include the demands of these communities in its constitution, right? That India advises Nepal to reconsider certain provisions and basically build a consensus around the constitution. That is what India advises Nepal. India had also provided some help, technical help in the sense of making of the constitution, not major. We sent some CDs, some papers, some documents. And this is not accepted by the Nepalese elite. So generally Nepalese elite is the one coming from the hills, the hill elite as they are called, right? The hill elites. And then there is people who are traditionally the part of ruling class in Nepal. So there is a class divide in Nepal's politics. And by September 2015, when the constitution comes up, India's requests have not been paid heed to. Popular demonstrations in Nepal continue. These popular demonstrations in Nepal become violent. This violence spreads across the Tarai region. And then what happens? That the movement of trucks, cargo traffic across the border stops. Meaning trucks stop moving from India to Nepal, right? And this is called blockade on the border. So many in Nepal said that India, to put pressure on Nepal, constituted a blockade of the border. Of course, government of India would say that there is no such policy of blockading Nepal. We did not blockade Nepal, but the trucks stopped moving simply because of deteriorating law and order situation, security situation in the border area, in the border region. So this blockade became an important example of friction in this relationship, because after September, generally in India also and in Nepal also, you have a festive season, and also winters are approaching. So in Nepal there is shortage of supply, because Nepal is dependent on India for supply of essentials, medicines, energy source, petroleum. So a shortage in the festive season, in the winters, leads to significant public resentment. जनता को ये बात पसंद नहीं आई. And there are always complex reasons for these kinds of situations, but there are also easy explanations, है ना? किसी भी situation में अगर आप सचमुच में उसको समझना चाहते हो तो आपको मेहनत करनी पड़ेगी, लेकिन आपको तो मेहनत करनी नहीं है, तो कोई भी 5 मिनट का वीडियो बनाएगा और आप क्योंकि डबल चेक करोगे नहीं तो वो जो कह रहा है वही आप मान लोगे. You would not even worry about factual inconsistencies, gross generalizations. पर आपको वो बात पसंद आई, एंटरटेन किया उसने आपको. कौन से किस तरह की चीजें पसंद आती, जो चीजें हमें एंटरटेन कर रही हैं. So education has also become entertainment. जिस चीज में हार्डवर्क चाहिए वो भी entertainment बन गया है आजकल. So this is what is happening to us as human beings. वैसे भी हमारा attention span बहुत कम था, दिमाग लगाने का मन नहीं करता था. It is said that human beings are cognitive misers. Human beings are cognitive misers. हमारा दिमाग least effort लगाना चाहेगा किसी भी चीज में. So if you are conscious, you will try to shape your mind. Otherwise, your mind will rule you. ये गीता में भी लिखा है, ये और रिलीजियस टेक्स्ट में भी लिखा है, और ये कॉमन सेंस भी है. So there are always easier explanations to complex issues, right? So what is the explanation here which gained traction? That India mounted this blockade, right? So political elite in Nepal found it expedient to blame India. Was India to blame? Of course, when you are writing the examination, I would not say anything. But some people say that in that same year there were elections in Bihar. And when there are elections, a lot of things are possible. Madhesi community has significant influence over in the Terai region, right? So those considerations were also there. But exam में ये सब नहीं लिखना होता है. Be that as it may, it became an issue of friction between India and Nepal. It became an example of the argument regarding India's interference in Nepal's politics. It then became a subject of significant contention against India, specifically in the political community and also among the people. So it was a significant time when India's image in Nepal suffered. And that is what has happened most of the times. India's image in Nepal suffered, right? So there is always a perception problem that India deals with in Nepal, a perception issue that India deals with in Nepal. So that's basically a primary factor in this relationship. So thereby what you would see is we find arguments on unequal arrangements in the relations, unequal arrangements. We find arguments of these arrangements limiting Nepal's sovereignty. We find arrangements regarding or accusations regarding interference in Nepal's politics. So these are the perception issues that India deals with in Nepal. All right. So what is the example? So for example, at various occasions in Nepal, demands have been made for the revision of 1950 treaty. These demands are made that 1950s treaty be revised. That is what some people would say. So basically, if you have a view of history, you will find that these are some of the common issues that you will see in India-Nepal relations. So whenever there is a transition in Nepal, political transition, generational shift in Nepal, it is found that India is entangled invariably in the domestic issues or domestic contentions in Nepal. Why? Because India has close relations with all sections of Nepal's society, right? So whenever there is a historical and political transition, generational shift in Nepal, India finds itself entangled in the domestic contentions in Nepal simply because India has close relations with all sections of Nepal's society. And thereby, especially in the elections, we find that Nepal's political elite has found it expedient to raise criticism of India, right? So we find that all sections of Nepal's political parties have criticized India, right? Have criticized India because it is politically expedient, है ना? जब भी घर में कुछ गड़बड़ चल रहा हो, कहो किसका हाथ है? बाहर वाले का हाथ है, right? Simple explanations. Religion is a simple explanation. outside influence is a simple explanation. It is not to say that that does not have a role to play, but no single factor can determine everything, है ना? केवल रिलीजन से सब नहीं हो जाता, केवल बाहर वालों के हाथ होने से सब कुछ नहीं हो जाता, ये सारे फैक्टर्स एक साथ काम करते हैं. बट स्टिल दैट इज आवर प्रॉब्लम. सो देयर बाय व्हाट वी विल फाइंड इज whenever such a scenario exists, there are certain common accusations that India faces. What are these accusations? A, that treaty arrangements or agreements with India are unequal. They benefit India more than Nepal. ये एक argument है. दूसरा argument क्या है? That these agreements and arrangements limit Nepal's sovereignty. Meaning, in other words, India dominates Nepal. ये perception है. दूसरा perception क्या है? That there is an interference by India in Nepal's politics. ये perception कहेंगे हम जब हम यूपीएससी में इंडिया में एग्जाम लिख रहे हैं. All right? That these are the issues of perception in Nepal's politics. So one prominent example of this is the question mark on 1950 Treaty of Friendship. So first of all, we understand that this is an example. Treaty of 1950 is an example of why we call this relationship special ties, special relations. But it is also at times a source of contention, right? It is also a source of contention. Source of contention wherever there are political, what is the context, in what context it's a source of contention? Political transition in Nepal, generational shift in Nepal. Whenever this happens, what you will find is that Treaty of 1950 is criticized in Nepal, right? Why is it criticized? So it is criticized in Nepal, and the context is always is important. You cannot make a blanket statement. We are saying that in some context in Nepal, this treaty is criticized. All right? So this treaty is criticized for being an unequal treaty. This treaty is criticized for limiting Nepal's sovereignty, right? What does this mean? Why is it unequal? Because some in Nepal say that this treaty has the potential for benefiting India more than Nepal. ऐसा लोग कहते हैं, समझते हैं. क्यों? Because this treaty has provisions like provisions for national treatment and reciprocal treatment between the two countries on the matter of their people. So it means that the treaty provisions, Article 1, 2, 3, ensure that in India and Nepal, their citizens would be treated at par, right? There would be no discrimination in the matters of trade, in the matters of employment, in the matters of residence. All right? So that is national treatment. That nationals of both sides would be treated as though they are national of that particular country. Indians in Nepal, Nepalese in India. Right? Reciprocal treatment. If favorable treatment is given by one country, another country would also reciprocate. Right? So that's why special people to people ties. That's why special people to people ties. आप सिविल सर्विस एग्जाम दे सकते हैं क्या? एक नेपाली सिटीजन सिविल सर्विस एग्जाम दे सकता है इंडिया में? दे सकता है? दे सकता है ना? आईएएस बन सकता है? यस सर. आईपीएस बन सकता है? नो सर. आईएफएस बन सकता है? तो क्या बन सकता है? सिविल सर्विस एग्जाम क्यों दे रहा है फिर? नोटिफिकेशन पढ़ लेना यूपीएससी का. ऑल राइट. This is only one example, the provision for Nepalese citizens to sit in India's civil service. There is only one example. which is an example of how from the treaty provisions, provisions like national treatment and reciprocal treatment for the citizens flow people to people ties, special provisions for people. So that is what makes this relationship special. And then you have provisions in this treaty for close defense ties. So originally the treaty in 1950 provided for close consultation between India and Nepal on matters concerning third countries. Right? So original treaty stipulated close consultation between India and Nepal on matters concerning third countries. It had provisions regarding arms supply to Nepal via India's territory. So that's why close defense ties are also promoted by the 1950 treaty. Why? One, the provision for close consultation on matters concerning third countries, and the provision for arms supply to Nepal. Arms supply to Nepal via India's territory. So, close defense relations. Now, in all these matters, these are the arguments that ultimately these are unequal. So India is a larger demography, so potentially India can benefit more, right? If Indians started going in large numbers to Nepal, we can convert Nepal into India. ऐसा बहुत सारे लोग statement भी देते रहते हैं. All right. Some people also teach that when the constitution was being made, Nepal's king came to India and said, "Where do I sign?" I am not aware of the reality of that story, but पढ़ाते पढ़ाते लोग ऐसा ही बोल देते हैं, जैसे नेपाल के पास तो अपना कुछ नहीं है. And that is the biggest problem. The way we talk about other countries, just because we are a large country, that does not mean other countries are not equal. They have sensitivity, right? And if we are not careful of the sensitivity, perception issues crop up. The way, है ना, आप पावरफुल देश से इसका मतलब नहीं आपको अधिकार है हर किसी को पैटर्नाइज करने का. आप कहते रहिए कि हम सबसे महान हैं, गाते रहिए गाना, पर हर किसी को लगता है कि वो महत्वपूर्ण है. महान हो चाहे नहीं हो, महत्वपूर्ण है. हर किसी को लगता है कि वो महत्वपूर्ण है ना? तो अगर आपने इस एस्पेक्ट का ध्यान नहीं दिया तो परसेप्शन इश्यूज वुड बी क्रिएटेड, है ना? सो दैट इज व्हाट वी आर सेइंग. सो देन reciprocal treatment, national treatment, they are questioned that they benefit India more. So that's why unequal treaty. Close defense ties, the argument is changed into that this has basically ensured India's dominance over Nepal. This has created Nepal's dependence on India. Nepal has become dependent on India for defense supplies. Right? After 1962 war, secret letters were exchanged wherein other provisions were also made. So in a true sense, where would Nepal get weapons from? Either from China, because that is the border, or from India. So India enjoyed a monopoly over arms supply to Nepal. So be that as it may, for various reasons, these factors are criticized in Nepal. What is India's position? So India's position is very simple, that for us, Treaty of 1950 is the basis for special ties between India and Nepal. It reflects the close geographical, historical, civilizational and people-to-people interactions between the two sides. It is a reflection of what has been the history of this relation, right? That we are connected by geography, so close geographical, historical, cultural, civilizational and people-to-people ties. That is what India's belief is, that this treaty makes this relationship special. And India has also stated that it is willing to make changes to accommodate Nepal's concerns, if any, as and when raised at an appropriate forum at the bilateral level. So if the Nepal government raises the issue of change in this treaty, India has shown some degree of flexibility in terms of consideration. That as and when demands for changes are made in the treaty, India is willing to accommodate the sensitivity of Nepal. That is what India's provision, India's answer to this contention is. So basically, राजनीति में जो भी बात हो रही हो, we are aware of it, but it does not become an issue unless the government raises it with the other government. So when the government raises it with the government of India, what we will do? Treatment treaty एक तरफा तो हो नहीं सकती, तो we would have to consider the changes, and we have been willing to consider the changes. So thereby, my suggestion to you would be to write an answer to this question. In the case of India-Nepal relations, in the case of India-Nepal relations, examine the Treaty of 1950, Treaty of Friendship 1950. Examine the Treaty of Friendship 1950 as a source of cooperation and contention. In the case of India-Nepal relations, examine the Treaty of 1950 as a source of cooperation and contention. अभी लिख लोगे इसका आंसर? Would you be able to write the answer to this question? Yes sir, यहाँ से आगे से आवाज आती, पीछे से भी मुझे चाहिए, पीछे जो बैठे हुए हैं महानुभाव. Would you be able to write the answer to this question? करेंगे? अभी लिखेंगे? Assignment sheets हैं? So we'll get the assignment sheets, we'll distribute it. So जब हम break लेंगे, तो ब्रेक में वो आपको शीट दे देंगे और उसके बाद आपके पास 5 मिनट है आंसर लिखने के लिए. दैट इज व्हाट आई वांट टू डू. 5 मिनट में क्या लिख पाते हो? ऑल राइट, मैंने 5 मिनट में लिखने लायक बातें बता दी हैं. अब डिपेंड करता है किस चीज पे? योर ओन लैंग्वेज कॉम्पिटेंस, एंड मोर देन दैट योर विलिंगनेस टू अप्लाई योर सेल्फ. खराब आंसर लिख लेंगे ऐसा सोच के आंसर नहीं लिखना, ये कोई ऑप्शन नहीं है. देन ओनली यू विल नो व्हाट यू नो एंड व्हाट यू डोंट नो. लेट मी रिपीट द स्टोरी. सो ए, व्हाट वी आर सेइंग इज दिस, दैट इंडिया नेपाल रिलेशंस आर स्पेशल रिलेशंस, बट दे आर ऑल्सो मार्क्ड बाय पीरियोडिक फ्रिक्शन. अंडरस्टूड? राइट? द स्पेशल नेचर ऑफ रिलेशनशिप derives from shared geography, shared history, shared cultural civilizational elements, as well as shared people to people ties. समझ में आ गया इतना? Frictions in India Nepal relations often arise in the context of what? Political and generational transition in Nepal. Political and generational transition in Nepal. For example, from monarchy to a democracy. From monarchy to a democracy. Most recently, the 2015 constitution making period was a period of friction in India-Nepal relations on the matters of perception. On the matters of perception. What perceptions? That arrangements with India are unequal. That arrangements with India limit Nepal's sovereignty, and that India interferes in Nepal's domestic politics. How can we make Treaty of 1950 an example of it? So first of all, Treaty of 1950 is the most important political framework of this relationship, which makes this relation special. One of the examples of why this relationship is special. But when there has been a political transition in Nepal, this treaty has been questioned. Again for the same things, that A, it's an unequal arrangement, B, it limits Nepal's sovereignty, and C, it makes Nepal dependent on India. These provisions mainly, these contentions mainly are pertaining to provisions like national treatment for citizens of both countries, in the matters of employment, in the matters of economic engagements, reciprocal treatment between both the countries in the matters of business investment, and also the provisions for close defense cooperation including arms supply in the treaty. ये समझ में आ गई आपको बात? And thereby, especially in the electoral arena, it has been pointed out that this treaty needs to be modified, changed. On this, India's position remains what? That this is a special instrument in this relationship which reflects the historicity of ties, and then India is willing to consider the changes in the treaty to accommodate Nepal's sensitivity as and when this issue is raised, right? So that is basically what I'm expecting from you, nothing more. But you should have this idea, at least what happens in India-Nepal relations, right? Let's move forward and let's then look at key issues, because that was only an example of why and where the friction in this relationship is coming from. So what are the key issues? The key issues are usual suspects. You have, as we had said, political and diplomatic engagements. Nothing new to add here. You have cooperation in the area of economy or economic engagements. You have engagements in defense and security. All right. So mainly these are the areas where you will find examples of cooperation or special relations. And then at the second level are issues where there are mixed results. So you have the issue of water resources, water resource cooperation. You have the issue of border. You have the issue of strategic concerns in this relationship. All right, strategic concerns in this relationship. So that's basically the substance of India-Nepal relation in terms of what issues do we see, right? So first of all, here quickly, don't forget Treaty of Friendship 1950. Don't forget India-Nepal Joint Commission. India-Nepal Joint Commission. And don't forget visits of political dignitaries. So ये तो constant example होगा इस case में हमेशा. These are the things that you should remember. 1950 Treaty of Friendship as a large framework. India-Nepal Joint Commission as a diplomatic platform where the review of various areas of cooperation takes place. And the visits of political dignitaries, prime ministerial visits, presidential visits, are times when these issues are mentioned in a dialogue that we are doing very good. ये political visits मतलब high level visit पे बहुत ज़्यादा कुछ नहीं होता, अच्छी अच्छी बातें होती हैं बस, क्योंकि मेन चीज़ है किसको रिजॉल्व करनी है एट द लोअर लेवल, है ना. प्राइम मिनिस्टर का काम नहीं होता प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व करना, प्राइम मिनिस्टर का काम होता है, प्रेसिडेंट का काम होता है प्रॉब्लम सॉल्व हो गई तो शाबाशी देना, राइट. So that's why you need dialogues like JEC, that's why you need bureaucrats, IAS, IFS, वो काम करते हैं. तो ये होता है यहाँ पे. और economic arrangements, let's take economic arrangements singularly. So first of all, what we can say is that economic engagements between India and Nepal have remained close. That there is close economic engagement between India and Nepal. Simple understanding. All right. So we can say that there is close economic engagement between India and Nepal. India and Nepal signed a trade agreement to facilitate or to promote trade between them in 2009 and also to prevent unauthorized trade. So, agreement on trade and to prevent unauthorized trade was signed in 2009. This is the latest trade agreement that they have, trade arrangement that they have. It is good if you can have some agreement. So that is there. What we see is that this has seen growth, this trade has seen growth from the 1990s. So we can say that India-Nepal trade has grown 11 times as from 1996 onwards, right? So there has been growth in trade. Trade has expanded. That's also true in this relationship. Trade has expanded. 11 times growth in trade since 1996. We see that last year the trade was around 7.4 billion US dollars. 7.4 billion US dollars of trade. So trade has been around 6 billion US dollars, 7 billion US dollars, close to 8 billion US dollars. So that's basically the status of the trade. And generally the common sense suggests balance of trade is in India's favor. India is a larger economy. With all its neighbors, it has a trade surplus in South Asia, not with China. All right, with China we have a large trade deficit. So here also we have a trade surplus. So these are the numbers. What else can we say about economic engagements between India and Nepal? We can add to it the fact that India is the largest trading partner of Nepal. India is the largest trading partner of Nepal. That is also true. So this is peeling the layers that beyond headlines, the concrete figures would suggest something else. India is the largest trading partner of Nepal. 1/3 of FDI, foreign direct investment in Nepal, comes from India. 1/3 of FDI. It has been true historically, it is true even now, right? Slightly more than 32% of Nepal's FDI is from India. 1/3 of FDI, foreign direct investment in Nepal, is from India. We would also add here that India also facilitates transit trade of Nepal. India also facilitates transit trade of Nepal. 90% of Nepal's transit trade to third countries, passes through India. All right, passes through India. So basically this is also an important element of economic engagement, that not only bilateral trade but also transit trade arrangements are there, and Nepal's first country of choice in terms of transit trade is India. Now, we also see that the arrangements include ports of Kolkata and Vizag. So ports of Kolkata and Vizag are used by Nepal for its exports. Kolkata and Vizag port. So again, transit trade. So for access to open oceans, Nepal is important for India. Geography dictates it. Closest port for Nepal are Indian ports. Kolkata, Vizag ports are dedicatedly used by Nepal. Apart from this, more than 90% of petroleum supplies to Nepal are from India. More than 90% of petroleum supply to Nepal comes from India. Right? 90% से ज़्यादा, 90% से ज़्यादा क्या, 99% is coming from India. Apart from that, the other element of economic engagement is large number of Nepalese citizens living and working in India and sending remittances back home. So India is also a large source of remittances contributing to Nepal's economy, right? Large source of remittances contributing to Nepal's economy. So इनमें से कुछ फीचर भी अगर आपको याद रह जाए तो बेटर है. व्हाट डिड वी से? दैट इंडिया नेपाल ट्रेड रिलेशंस आर क्लोज. दे हैव क्लोज ट्रेड एंड इकोनॉमिक एंगेजमेंट्स. वी सेड India is the largest trade partner of Nepal. Nepal is among one of the largest trading partners for India in South Asia. Trade is upward of $7 billion with a balance on India's side. If we look at this trade, we have arrangements like 2009 trade agreement, an agreement to prevent unauthorized trade. If we look at the historical trajectory, we find there has been growth in trade 11 times larger trade as compared to 1996. Both of them are important export markets for each other. We also understand that FDI into Nepal, also India is an important source. 1/3 of FDI is coming from India. We also understand transit trade. More than 90% of Nepal's transit trade is from India via ports like Vizag and Kolkata port. We also said energy supplies. More than 90% of Nepal's energy supplies comes from India. We also said that India is also a large source of remittances for Nepal. So if we look at economic engagements and we open up trade, we find that we can say that there is a reasonably good picture present there. What else we can say is that there is a need to move towards a balanced trade. All right, there is a need to move towards a balanced trade by creating better opportunities for both countries. All right, right now around 500 million is what Nepal exports. More than 6.5 billion is what India exports. So it would be ideal if we move towards a balanced trade by creating better opportunities for both countries. This may include moving towards a new trade agreement with special provisions. So one way can be scope क्या है, way forward क्या है, moving towards a new trade agreement. What else can be done? Creating efficiency in trade linkages. That's the second way. Creating efficiency in trade linkages. How so? By improving border infrastructure and connectivity. By improving border infrastructure and connectivity. That's the way forward. By improving border infrastructure and connectivity. This is how we can improve our economic engagements in terms of trade, either by moving towards a new trade agreement for balanced trade, and definitely by creating efficiency, by improving turnaround time. Border infrastructure improve kiya, connectivity improve kiya. Other aspect of economic engagements between India and Nepal is the area of development cooperation. So development cooperation also constitutes a significant element of, or development cooperation is a significant element of economic engagements between India and Nepal. Development cooperation is a significant element of economic engagements between India and Nepal. ये हमने कह दिया तो हमको प्रूव करना पड़ेगा. We have to tell how so. So India is committed to assist Nepal in the development of its infrastructure. India is committed to assisting Nepal in the development of its infrastructure. So India is engaged in this in the form of high impact community development programs, small development projects. All right, small development projects in a school, for example, building of a classroom. All right, ड्रिंकिंग वाटर फैसिलिटीज, जहां पे भी जिस जगह भी प्रोजेक्ट बेसिस पे कुछ इंप्लीमेंट करने की जरूरत है, इंडिया प्रोवाइड सम मनी. स्मॉल डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स. हाई इंपैक्ट कम्युनिटी डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स. हाई इंपैक्ट कम्युनिटी डेवलपमेंट प्रोजेक्ट्स, these are projects, high impact community development projects are short gestation period, high visibility projects. Projects which are based on the immediate demands of the local community. All right, high impact community development projects. If there is a local demand that we understand, let's say a local road has to be built, right, a community center, a school building has to be built, an agricultural project has to be built, India also provides assistance there. High impact community development projects. These are short gestation period, high visibility projects which have an immediate impact on the living conditions of the people, of the community. So community demand based projects India implements. Similarly, what you see is in recent times, India has offered multiple lines of credits to Nepal worth close to $2 billion US. All right, in recent times, India has offered multiple lines of credit to Nepal worth nearly $2 billion US. Right, so $2 billion US we have committed to Nepal, line of credit, soft loan plus grants. Prominent example of this is India committed $1 billion US for the reconstruction activities or for the reconstruction after 2015 earthquake. So we committed more than $1 billion US after the 2015 earthquake. In the donors conference in 2017 July, India offered $1 billion US. So India was the largest donor to Nepal in the aftermath of its earthquake. All right. India was also among the first to respond in relief activities for this earthquake. Right. So committed $1 billion US. This also that India responded to support relief activities in Nepal after the earthquake of 2015 is a development support. And an example of this is India building 50,000 housing units in the Gorkha district of Nepal. India building 50,000 housing units in the Gorkha district of Nepal. 50,000 housing units India has built. So that is one example of where the development projects are implemented. So that completes what? The picture of economic engagements between India and Nepal, right, with facts and also major areas of focus. So with this we can say that though there is some scope in improving economic engagements, and it will happen, but current arrangements are also reasonable. All right, we can say that there is close cooperation between India and Nepal in terms of economic engagements. So we take a break. After the break, we come back and continue with India-Nepal relations, and then we write the answer. I hope you know that you are not in the parliament. तो ब्रेक के समय आप सभी के पास टाइम था, भी बैठ जाइए. और असाइनमेंट शीट्स मिल गई आपको? कुछ लिखा आपने? क्वेश्चन तो मैंने बताया था पहले. क्वेश्चन तो मैं पहले ही लिखवा के चला गया हूं. याद आया? क्वेश्चन लिखवाया मैंने? लाइए, जिसने लिखा हो मुझे बता दीजिए. क्या क्वेश्चन है? In case of India-Nepal relations, examine Treaty of Friendship 1950 as a source of cooperation and contention. तो क्वेश्चन ही लिखवाया था, तो आंसर लिखने की कोशिश की आप लोगों ने? अब लिखेंगे. मैंने सोचा कि आप अपने को सेल्फ टाइम कर लेंगे. यू आर ऑल एडल्ट्स. चलिए ये बाद में लिख लीजिएगा. अभी कंटिन्यू, लेट्स कंटिन्यू विद द टॉपिक. राइट, लेट्स कंटिन्यू विद द टॉपिक्स. आप बाद में लिख लीजिएगा, काफी टाइम मिला था. सो सेल्फ मोटिवेशन भी होना चाहिए, सेल्फ ऑर्गेनाइजेशन भी होना चाहिए. आई एम नॉट अ जेलर हु विल कम एंड टेल यू टाइम स्टार्ट्स नाउ. मैंने क्लास के बीच में ही कह दिया था कि व्हेन वी टेक अ ब्रेक द शीट्स वुड बी गिवन टू यू. आप लिख लीजिए, आपको इतना ज्यादा टाइम भी दिया, फिर भी आप सोचते रहे. चलिए, लेट्स talk about India-Nepal relations. So we so far have talked about the relations from a framework perspective, from looking at a particular pattern in this relationship where there are frictions, and then we opened up issues in this relationship. So we looked at economic engagements as one issue area of cooperation where we saw examples. Now we move towards discussing areas like defense cooperation between India and Nepal, right? Let's do that quickly. Now, when we look at defense cooperation between India and Nepal, defense and security cooperation, first of all, you can write that Nepal, being a Himalayan country and sharing a border with China, Nepal being a Himalayan country with a long and shared border with India, क्योंकि मैं नहीं बोलूंगा तो आप लिखेंगे नहीं, है ना? तो इसलिए चाइना से पहले मुझे लगा मैं ये भी लिख देता हूं ताकि आपको एक सेंस हो जाए. पहले जिन इंडिया और जिस देश के बारे में बात करें वो पॉइंट्स, उसके बाद चाइना. ऑलराइट, सो नेपाल एज अ हिमालयन कंट्री एंड विथ अ लॉन्ग एंड शेयर्ड बॉर्डर विथ इंडिया as well as China is an important consideration in India's larger defense and security calculations. Nepal is a Himalayan country plus a long and shared border with India, 1850 kilometers, plus a shared border with China. So that means that we can easily say that it has been an important consideration in India's defense and security preparedness. On the one hand, the open nature of border. On the one hand, the open nature of border requires adequate vigil, V-I-G-I-L, adequate vigil to prevent its misuse. Given the open nature of border, adequate vigil is required to prevent its misuse by antisocial and criminal elements, antisocial and criminal elements. For purposes like drug and arms trafficking, for purposes like drugs and arms trafficking, and the trafficking of fake Indian currency notes or the trafficking of fake Indian currency notes. For this purpose, the Sashastra Seema Bal, SSB, for this purpose, the SSB, Sashastra Seema Bal, is the dedicated, for this purpose, the Sashastra Seema Bal is the dedicated force on India's borders, is the dedicated force on India's border with close cooperation with their Nepalese counterparts, with close cooperation with their Nepalese counterparts. Close cooperation with their Nepalese counterparts. There is also cooperation between the local administrations. There is also cooperation between the local administrations in the bordering districts. In the bordering districts on both sides. In the bordering districts on both sides. In this context, the final delineation of border, in this context, the final delineation of border and adequate marking through pillars, remains an ongoing process, remains an ongoing process. Remains an ongoing process. There are close interactions between, paragraph change, there are close interactions between the armed forces of the two countries. There is close cooperation between the armed forces of the two countries. There is close cooperation between armed forces of the two countries. Right? So what are the examples? So first of all, you have the example of training, where more than 250 training slots, more than 250 slots are made available to the members of Nepal's armed forces in India's training institutions. So one level of interaction between armed forces is joint training. 250 slots are made available to the members of Nepal's armed forces in India's training institutions. So officers in India's military and Nepal's military have familiarity because they train with each other. 250 training slots. There is a tradition of according the rank of honorary general. There is a tradition of according the rank of honorary general. There is a tradition of according the rank of honorary general to the heads of the armies, to the heads of the armies of both countries, to the heads of the armies of both countries in each other's military establishment, meaning the chief of Indian army is considered a general of Nepal's army, chief of Nepal's army is considered to be a general of India's army. Honorary hai, matlab there is no effective use of it, but that symbolizes close cooperation. The exercise, what is the joint military exercise between India and Nepal? Surya Kiran. The exercise Surya Kiran has become a regular feature the exercise Surya Kiran has become a regular feature in the engagement between the armed forces. In the engagement between the armed forces. So exercise Surya Kiran. Next point is the recruitment of 32,000 Gorkha soldiers. The recruitment of 32,000 Gorkha soldiers by the Indian military is a special element, in the defense cooperation, in the defense cooperation between both sides. So again, if we are recruiting soldiers from another country in our military, that also shows that there are special relations. है ना? Indian military, even UK military recruits Golkha soldiers. That has been the historical trend. आज भी ब्रिटेन की मिलिट्री रिक्रूट करती है गोरखा सोल्जर्स नेपाल से. इंडियन मिलिट्री ऑल्सो रिक्रूट्स गोरखा सोल्जर्स फ्रॉम नेपाल. है ना? That's a tradition that continues. So that shows you that this is a special relationship. The soldiers themselves are an element of trust between India and Nepal. ये दिखाता है आप जनरली अपनी आर्मी में किसी बाहर वाले को सर्व नहीं कराते हैं. दूसरा, इट्स अ कंटिन्यूड एलिमेंट ऑफ इंटरैक्शन बिटवीन बोथ साइड्स. आखिर उस सोल्जर का परिवार है उस साइड पे, राइट? तीसरा जो है वो ये कि व्हेन दीज सोल्जर्स रिटायर दे ड्रॉ पेंशन फ्रॉम इंडियन सिस्टम. दे गो बैक टू देयर विलेजेस and they are the local dignitaries, important people. So India is engaged with Nepal at multiple levels. ये example भी इस चीज को बताता है, right? So if you see, there are a lot of times when there may be a concern in Nepal on what happens in India, right? So when we demonetized, नेपाल वालों ने कहा हमें तो बताया नहीं, आपके नोट तो हमारे यहाँ भी चलते हैं. All right. Similarly, when Agniveer issue came, so now there is some concern in Nepal कि अब ये recruitment कैसे होगा, right? So we are very closely linked. That's the meaning of it. So this is the nature of defense and security cooperation between these two sides. So first of all, you have SSB on the border for border management, crime related issues. They have dialogue with their counterparts. It's a regular feature. We have interaction between armed forces, training. So it's quite possible that today the leading professionals in Nepal's army and the leading professionals in India's army may have been batchmates. तो एक लेवल का engagement वो है. दूसरा ये कि basically we conduct exercises. Surya Kiran has become fairly regular. Generally it takes place in Pithoragarh, Uttarakhand. And then you have the recruitment of Gorkha soldiers. So that basically again tells you that no matter what is happening, these are special elements of this relationship. So don't forget these examples. Now after that, we need to move towards other areas of the relation. So what other area of relation? Where we find that these are elements of the special relationship, but there is scope. So we said there is potential is unfulfilled. We said there is potential, but there is also friction. So some areas denote this possibility better than others. So water resource is one area. What's the story here? So that's why I told you to engage in that exercise. What exercise? Looking at the map of Nepal in your atlas. है ना? And not to waste time on too much of YouTube videos. है ना? आजकल यूक्रेन रशिया वॉर के बाद से हर कोई अपने आर्ग्यूमेंट के अंदर में जियो स्ट्रेटेजिक लगा देता है, ऐसा लगता है कुछ इंपॉर्टेंट बात कह रहा है. That is something that you don't have to do. Once you have understood anything from any simple source, fine, go ahead. Don't waste your time. So this is the Nepal-India map. So first of all, the factors that we have already talked about. The shared rivers, this is the river Kali. All right, this is the river Kali. The river Kali then is the source of, कहाँ चला गया भाई मैप? Okay, so the river Kali is also the border between India and Nepal, right? Border between India and Nepal. And then river Kali, as we said, when it comes to India, Mahakali or Kali comes to India, it is called Sharda, right? This is Karnali, Ghagra, and then they both flow as Ghagra, meeting the Ganges, an important tributary of Ganges. Left bank, right bank? Majority left bank कह रही है तो मानना ही पड़ेगा. But you have a NCERT in geography, right? Okay. This is Narayani river. It is known as Narayani in Nepal. It is Gandak in India. But see, the origins are in China, right? So some rivers are flowing from China to India via Nepal. All the rivers coming from Nepal, part of the Ganges basin, important tributaries of Ganges basin. And then you have various streams of the Kosi river, as you would see, right? Sapta Kosi, various streams meeting and then entering India. So these are major rivers. Why I am saying these major rivers? So you have from east to west, west to east, the major rivers in three parts of Nepal, in different areas of the border that India shares with Nepal. So that's one. Another is, if you see the border, 1850 kilometer long border. Now, China also has a border with Nepal. But what is the difference? China side of the border is difficult terrain, high mountainous region. Many of the 8,000ers, Annapurna, Everest, are on this side of the border. So difficult to cross. So that's why you would see this border, India-Nepal border, is in the plains. This is a plain border. So historically it has been possible, easier for people to move from Nepal to India and vice versa, rather than between Tibet and Nepal or China and Nepal. So even though Nepal has two shared borders, border with India is more conducive for people to people ties, right? Geography, that's why we say, is on our side. We should take advantage of that. And then you have various points on the border, right? So you have places like Biratnagar, Birganj. Places like Biratnagar, Birganj are important because there are some of the important ICPs, integrated checkposts on the border. All right. So you have the Raxaul Birganj checkpost, ICP integrated checkpost, and then you have a checkpost at the Biratnagar point of the border. So again, this map simply tells you a few things. That location of Nepal is important for India. Nepal is a landlocked country. It shares two borders with India and Nepal, within India and China. Border with India is an open border. What is the meaning of open border? There are no restrictions on people crossing this border. किसी ने कहा कि वीजा की जरूरत नहीं होती है. So that's the meaning of open border, that you can cross over from one side to the other easily. We have not sought to enforce the border strictly, right? Open border. Where does it come from? So a lot of sources, कभी-कभी newspaper में भी ये लिख देते हैं कि it is from the 1950 Treaty of Peace and Friendship. That is not the case. Open border is because it is part of custom and usage. It's a long-term practice which both sides have not sought to control or prevent. So the nature of open border comes from the fact that people have been using this border in this way for centuries, millennia. And this is part of custom and usage. So sometimes custom and usage also acquire the force of law, right? अगर बहुत लंबे समय तक कोई चीज हो रही हो तो वो अपने आप में एक लीगल बेसिस एक्वायर कर लेती है. सो ओपन बॉर्डर कम्स फ्रॉम कस्टम्स एंड यूजेज, नॉट फ्रॉम द ट्रीटी ऑफ 1950, right? Not from the treaty of 1950, right? So once we have seen this border, we also realize that many Indian states share the border with Nepal. और इंडियन पॉलिटिक्स में भी ये स्टेट बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है. यू कैनॉट बिकम द प्राइम मिनिस्टर ऑफ दिस कंट्री विदाउट विनिंग दीज स्टेट्स. विच आर द स्टेट्स? यूपी एंड बिहार. ऑलराइट, कितनी सीटें हैं टोटल दोनों में मिला के? 120. 80 प्लस 14, 40 या 39 या 43? 40. चलो, good. So then from this you can simply awareness तो है, simply understand now the issue of rivers. All right, issue of rivers वो आप चेक कर लेना. 39 है, 40 है, बिहार में इलेक्शन लड़ना है जिसको भी. I am just saying that you are aware of these things by simple association. So then when we look at the issue of water resources, we can start with a simple understanding that transboundary rivers are commonly shared resources between India and Nepal. Transboundary rivers are commonly shared resources between India and Nepal. So generally we say that there are thousands of water bodies which are shared between India and Nepal. But in general we can say that around 250 major water features are shared between the two countries, right? There may be thousands of water bodies, small rivulets, nallas, right, which are shared between India and Nepal, but we can say that generally, largely 250 significant water bodies are shared between these two sides, which includes major transboundary rivers, which includes major transboundary rivers. और यहाँ पे आता है वो example जो हमने use किया, such as the Mahakali dash Sarda, Karnali dash Ghagra, Narayani dash Gandak, all right, and Saptakoshi dash Kosi, all right. So that's where the example comes. आप पूरे दो हजारों नदियों का नाम तो लिख नहीं सकते, 250 रिवर रिवुलेट्स का नाम तो लिख नहीं सकते, इसलिए कुछ का नाम याद होना जरूरी है. On the one hand, the adequate cooperation in management of these resources can be mutually beneficial. On the one hand, adequate management of these resources can be mutually beneficial. While Nepal can benefit from investment and capacity building, in the construction of hydropower plants, India can benefit in the area of flood management. India can benefit in the area of flood management, especially in the plains of Uttar Pradesh and Bihar. So जो भी पॉलिटिकल लीडर बिहार की पेरेनियल समस्या क्या है? फ्लडिंग. इस सीजन के अंदर लार्ज पार्ट ऑफ बिहार इज फ्लडेड. सो any political leader who can resolve this would become popular, but for resolving this what you require? Cooperation with Nepal. All right. So India can benefit in the area of flood management. Additionally, both sides can benefit through irrigation. Both sides can benefit through irrigation, fisheries, and connectivity potential of the rivers and connectivity potential of the rivers. Right? So farmers can benefit, fishing community can benefit, and you can also use rivers as inland waterways to connect India and Nepal better. However, this area of cooperation, this area of engagement remains, both a source of contention, and marked by inadequate progress, limited by, marred by, marked by inadequate progress. So the picture is this, that there is potential, both sides can benefit if there is cooperation, but either there is contention, or even if there are agreements, there is lack of cooperation. So how do we explain this? For example, right? For example, number one, despite major agreements, such as, what agreements can you recall between India and Nepal? Despite major agreements, Kosi Agreement of 1954, Gandak Agreement of 1959, Kosi Agreement of 1954, Gandak Agreement of 1959, and the Mahakali Agreement of 1996, Major projects. So despite signing of these agreements, major projects remain stuck for more than 3 decades. Major projects remain stuck for more than 3 decades. For example, the Pancheshwar project. For example, the Pancheshwar project under the Mahakali Agreement, the Pancheshwar project under the Mahakali Agreement remains incomplete. The Pancheshwar project on the Mahakali Agreement remains incomplete. So that's one feature, that we have agreements dating back to 1954, 1959, 1964, 1996. But the status, small projects have been there, small irrigation projects have been there, culverts, etc., check dams have been there, canals have been there, but major projects on Kosi, Gandak and Mahakali, for example, Pancheshwar, these kinds of projects are stuck for nearly 3 decades or more than 3 decades. So that's one way in which we can say potential, but lack of progress. Secondly, despite its hydropower potential, Nepal imports power from India. Despite its hydropower potential, Nepal imports power from India. So that is another thing that you can see from Nepal side. Nepal has the potential. If projects are implemented, Nepal can become self-sufficient, not only self-sufficient, but also can become an exporter of power. But the status is Nepal imports electricity from India, meaning Nepal itself has not been able to harness the potential of its rivers, right? In comparison, so now you can bring comparison also. What would you compare this with? Bhutan. All right. In comparison, the India-Bhutan relations are an example of successful interdependence. India-Bhutan. In comparison, India-Bhutan relations are successful example of interdependence in water resource cooperation. Water resource cooperation. The reasons. So what are the reasons? Why such a state of affair? क्यों है ऐसा? What can you think of? The reasons for lack of progress in this area of cooperation are following. क्या हैं? The reasons for lack of cooperation in this area of engagement are following. क्या है? Political हो गया, good. Infrastructure हो गया, और episodic nature of the relationship. All of you are right. So let's simply write. So 1, the transition in Nepal's domestic politics, multiple transitions in Nepal's domestic politics and a lack of domestic consensus have been hurdles. Transitions in Nepal's politics and a lack of domestic consensus. Different political actors at different times would talk about different things. Have been hurdles in developing adequate cooperation or implementation of projects. In developing adequate cooperation or implementation of projects. Implementation of projects. Second, the continuing perception and arguments in some sections of Nepal's society, the continuing perception and arguments in some sections of Nepal society on the unequal nature of agreements with India. On the unequal nature of agreements with India. Also undermine the potential for cooperation. The continued perception and arguments in some sections of Nepal society on the agreements with India being unequal, on the unequal nature of agreements with India. Also limit the potential for cooperation, right? Thirdly, what is the third reason? Thirdly, apprehensions regarding displacement, environment and other local issues. and other local issues. Concerns regarding displacement, environment and other local issues have also been a source of contention, right? So three major things that we can see. First of all, Nepal has seen continuous transition. So there has not been sufficient time to develop a common understanding with the governments. So in transition, these kinds of cooperation have been difficult. And then whenever there is transition, there is always an argument that these treaties are unequal. They benefit India more. India is signing these agreements to benefit itself. So that is an argument that is there in various sections of Nepal society. Thirdly, whenever there are projects like this, locally there would always be concerns about displacement, all right, or environment, or any other local concern that may be there, right? So then, what is it that should be done? So first of all, we move towards the solution. What is to be done? So, considering the significance of cooperation for mutual benefit, India and Nepal constituted a three-tier mechanism. In 2008, to discuss the issue of water resource cooperation, three-tier mechanism, meaning three levels of dialogue: technical, experts ke level pe, bureaucratic, so government officials, and ministers. That is the meaning of three-tier initiative, all right? So India and Nepal have established a three-tier mechanism in 2008 to discuss water resource cooperation. Similarly, in recent times, India has been awarded projects on the river Arun. Arun 1, Arun 3 and Arun 4. Arun is a river in Nepal on which Indian companies are building hydropower plant, right? So Arun 3, Arun 4 project in recent times have been awarded to India, 2013-14, and now this year Arun 4 project has been awarded to India. So some progress can be expected. So building on these initiatives, there is a need for doing what? Number one suggestion is what? There is a need for negotiating and signing a broad framework agreement. For taking forward cooperation in water resource management. So there is a need to do what? To negotiate and sign a broad framework agreement for taking forward cooperation in water resources. So a broad agreement can be signed at the level of governments, at the top level. Since there is stability in Nepal, now we know who is the Prime Minister and we expect that they would remain there. Governments would be stable. So as stability arises, there is an opportunity that governments think of the new situation and then broadly decide the broad parameters of cooperation between the two states. Secondly, what can be done? Secondly, focus should be on implementation of long pending projects such as the Pancheshwar Dam project. Focus should be on implementation of long pending projects such as the Pancheshwar Dam project. In this context, a time-bound implementation of Arun 3 project. In this context, a time-bound implementation of Arun 3. In this context, a time-bound implementation of Arun 3 project would be helpful in establishing India's credibility. In this context, a time-bound implementation of the Arun 3 project would be helpful in establishing India's credibility. Thirdly, wherever possible, local communities and local solutions, wherever possible, local communities and local solutions must be engaged. Wherever possible, local communities and local solutions must be engaged in managing water issues, especially in the border areas. Wherever possible, local communities and local solutions must be engaged in managing water issues, especially in the border areas. So I'm simply suggesting three levels of solutions. One is political and diplomatic level of solution. 3-tier mechanism already exists, वहाँ बात करते रहिए, but at the topmost level of government framework agreement sign कीजिए. फिर क्या कीजिए, कुछ projects हैं जिनको implementation करने पे traction आ जाएगा इस field के cooperation में. So make effort for implementation of Pancheshwar project. Then do what? The Arun 3 project is a commercial project. So that commercial project, the effort should be, it should be implemented in a time-bound manner so that we are seen as credible. And then at the level of people, in the bordering areas, there are multiple water resources, small river, rivulets, nalas, whose water is shared between both sides, villages on both sides share them. In some villages there have been local solutions. For example, the stream is divided into 3, right? One for the use of Nepal's people, one for the use of India's people, and one for the purpose of maintaining an adequate flow in the river. So if there are local solutions, क्या करेंगे, उसको encourage करिए, because top-down model is not going to be always successful. So if you can make use of local solutions, even as officials, अफसर बन के जाओगे, कुर्सी पे बैठ के एडमिनिस्ट्रेशन चलाओगे तो ऐसे ही चलता रहा है. If you can engage people in the solution, कहने की बात है, बनने के बाद तो देखेंगे ऐसा होता है कि नहीं होता है. But if you want to be successful bureaucrats, you should think of issues to be solved at different levels. तभी आप अपने इंस्ट्रूमेंट सही तरीके से चूज कर पाओगे, है ना. हर चीज केवल कलम चलाने से, ऑर्डर देने से, डांटने से नहीं होगी. कुछ चीजों में परसुएड करना पड़ेगा, कुछ चीजों में टैक्ट का इस्तेमाल करना पड़ेगा. So local solution, whenever possible, encourage them. That's what we are looking at. And then finally, India needs to factor in the increasing role of China in Nepal's hydropower sector. India needs to factor in the increasing role of China in Nepal's hydropower sector. Nepal's hydropower sector. What does this mean? This means that अपने को competitively efficient बनाना है. China is not going anywhere. China is there. Nepal is a landlocked, underdeveloped country. It needs investments. And that is why primarily China is there. One reason. So then it means that you need to adequately prepare for competition. Our companies should be better at implementing projects. That is there, right? So that's what we are saying, that we need to adequately factor in the competitive element of China, increasing role in the hydro power sector of Nepal. So again, if you see, this is one prominent area in relations with Nepal that can be worth a question in the examination. Water resource cooperation. Why? Simply because it exemplifies the relation. A, potential. B, some progress. Agreement sign kiye hain. C, frictions, differences, and because of that, non-implementation, non-progress. So that's why it is also ripe for solutions. Alright? So that's why this topic exemplifies the relation, and that's why you can think of it as a question in the examination. Water resource cooperation between India and Nepal, a prominent issue. Now let's come to the border, the issue of border. Alright, and for that let's go to the map once again. Now when we look at this particular map, what we should keep in mind is the fact that long shared border, we have already emphasized, 1850 kilometer long border, shared across the Tarai region, right, across certain states. And we had also mentioned when we talk about security, that since the border is open, it is important for India to adequately manage its borders. So all this requires what? One, domestic preparedness, जो हम कर सकते हैं वो, but also on the other side, cooperation with Nepal, right? And this is subject to finally delineating India-Nepal boundary. Finally, finalizing India-Nepal boundary. लेट हो रहा है? लेट हो रहा है तो आप आराम से जा सकते हैं, जिनको भी जाना है. सामने खड़े होकर टाइम देखेंगे तो मैं भी टाइम देखने लगूंगा. मैं 3 घंटे खड़ा होकर के ये करता रहता हूं. राइट, सो व्हाट वी आर सेइंग इज फ्लो टूट जाता है बेसिकली, और कुछ नहीं. सो व्हाट वर वी सेइंग, वेयर वाज आई? Right. So on the borders, what we see is that the delineation of India-Nepal boundary is a continuing process. Complete नहीं हुआ है अभी. And for different purpose. If we need to manage our borders better, if we need repair and refurbishment of pillars for that better management, so that we can adequately guard our border against its misuse. So what is required, and also to improve India-Nepal relations in general, what is required is a satisfactory delineation of border. So satisfactory delineation of border then requires understanding what are the issues on the border. This is a 2020 map that included newer claims by Nepal. So if we see, apart from the basic facts, वो तो आपको याद है, वो लिखवाना नहीं है आपको, कितना लंबा बॉर्डर है, कौन शेयर करता है. What we understand is that number one, the issue of delineation of border between India and Nepal remains a continuing process. All right, that is the position of MEA. What is the nature of border? Is there conflict? We don't say there is much of a conflict, but we say that the issue of delineation of border between India and Nepal remains a continuing process. तो एक तो पूरी बाउंड्री का पिक्चर दिखा दिया आपको, that we are in the process of delineating the boundary, officially marking the boundary. It's a continuing process. For this purpose, in 1981, right, in 1981, what happened? In 1981, India and Nepal established a joint level technical team. A joint technical team was established in 1981 for delineation of borders. So process bhi hai. Matlab efforts have been made. Delineation of borders. 1981 joint technical team was created by both countries. At this level, surveys and preparation of strip maps was undertaken. So this joint level technical team undertook surveys and prepared strip maps. All right. So almost 98% of the border is delineated on the strip maps at the level of proposal, right? 98% of this process delineated or brought clarity on 98% of the border. However, the final agreement to formalize the boundary is yet to be signed. Right? So joint level team 1981 conducted surveys, prepared strip maps of smaller areas, right? And through this process, 98% of the border, there is clarity. 98% of the border, there is a common understanding. However, what is remaining? Signing of a final agreement for formalizing the boundary. And in 2007, Nepal had refused to formalize the boundary. Nepal had refused to formalize the boundary as it insisted on the resolution of its territorial claims. As it insisted on the resolution of its territorial claims on two areas, Kalapani and Susta, S-U-S-T-A, right? It wanted resolution of territorial claims on Kalapani and Susta. Kalapani, Susta, right? So that means that there are some territorial issues which are pending. Delineation of border is subject to satisfactory resolution of some of the territorial differences. And these territorial differences are on Kalapani and Susta. Right? So let's simply understand it on map. Here we have the region that has been in news since 2020. So here is the location of Kalapani. Alright? And Kalapani for India is on the tri-junction between its borders with नेपाल. ये पहले तो ये याद रख लो कि ये नेपाल ने जो क्लेम किया है वो मैप है ना? This does not represent India's position. This is new claim of Nepal. So 2020, Nepal's parliament approved a new map of Nepal, which presented a claim beyond Kalapani to include a triangular area of Lipulekh Pass, Kalapani and Limpiadhura Pass. So that is the new claim of Nepal, added to the earlier issues, Kalapani and Susta. So in 2020, Nepal added to its claim by passing a new map. Right? 2020 में एक नया मैप इशू किया नेपाल में, and here Nepal has expanded its claim to include an area, triangular area between Lipulekh Pass, Kalapani and Limpiadhura Pass. All right? That is something that you should understand first of all. So this is a newer claim. हमने कहा कालापानी सुस्ता पहले, अब 2020 में और क्या? Newer claims of Nepal to include a large area. And this is part of the continuing difficulty. We'll understand that difficulty. Let's look at the location of Susta. This is Google. Google doesn't understand Susta, Google understands sustainable, so it will tell me that no matter what you want to search, I will tell you what I know. So इसीलिए Google को भी intelligent बनाना पड़ता है. So these days everybody is intelligent because they think that they have Google in their pocket. They can talk about anything because Google is there in the pocket. But who would tell you to ask the right questions to Google? Google तो वही आंसर देगा जो आप सवाल पूछ रहे हैं उससे. So this is basically another area of Susta. All right, this is the Narayani or Gandak river. So in some portions of the border, Narayani or Gandak river is the border, and this river is known for changing course. generally, fast flowing Himalayan rivers, as they enter into the plains, they are known for their erosion. Ganges, tributaries of Ganges are known for forming Oxbow Lake. Oxbow Lake, generally, river is changing its course. Right? So here also, what happens is changing course of Gandak has meant that the Susta village, which Nepal claims to be a part of its territory, has fallen on India's side. So this is West Champaran district. This is the West Nawalparsi district of Nepal. And this is the Gandak river as it flows now. And this is the old stream of Gandak. So as Gandak used to flow earlier in its old course, Susta was on Nepal's side. Now Gandak flows in a new course. It has changed its course. So now Susta has come on India's side. East-west bank consideration jo hai. Right? So this is how this issue has arisen. So in simple terms, we understand that generally the issues revolve around these two territorial claims. One is the area of Limpiadhura, Kalapani and Lipu Lake, that basically Nepal is now talking about, but traditionally the contention has been on the area of Kalapani. So Kalapani is on the tri-junction of India, Nepal, China border, right? It is on the tri-junction of India, Nepal, China border. It is on the banks of the Mahakali river. So remember this pair, Mahakali, Kalapani, Susta, Gandak. All right. So Kalapani is on the tri-junction between India, Nepal and China. It is on the banks of the Mahakali river and it is considered to be a strategically significant territory. Strategically significant territory. And from 1962 onwards, India has maintained a security presence in this region, which Nepal claims to be a part of its territory. So where does this contention comes from? The contention comes from a different reading of British era agreements like the Treaty of Sugauli or Sagauli 1816. Right? So after many wars, as I told you, Nepal and British India signed agreements. So one of the important agreements was Treaty of Sugauli 1816. In 1816, India signed Treaty of Sugauli with Nepal. All right. So when that happened, Treaty of Sugauli was signed with Nepal. Some provision of that treaty made rivers as the basis of border between India and Nepal in some areas. Right? In some areas, what happened? The Treaty of Sugauli 1816. 1816 Treaty of Sugauli, a British era treaty, made rivers as the basis of borders between India and Nepal. So that's where the interpretation differs. Right? So for example, in the case of Kalapani, the issue is that of the origins of river Kali, because here Kali is the consideration for boundary. So India and Nepal differ on the origins of the river Kali. All right, on the origins of the river Kali. So that's why different claims. In Nepal's consideration, in accordance with Treaty of Sugauli, Kalapani belongs to it. India says that Nepal's consideration is wrong in terms of its calculation of where the origins of the river are. India also says that since 1830s, the British era administrative records show this area to be part of India. All right, so this is what we are talking about. This is where you have the region of Kalapani. This is the tri-junction. वो जो map था वो नेपाल का claim था. So this is basically where the Kalapani is. So where the river originates would determine who controls it. India controls it. India says that it is consistent with 1816 Treaty of Sugauli. It is consistent with historical records of 1830s, British era administrative records of showing this area to be part of India. That's what India is saying on this particular issue. And remember, this is important for India because it is strategically significant, right? Because it is right on the tri-junction between India, Nepal and China. So it is most likely that India would not be compromising on this. On Susta, it's a simple issue of land parcel. When the river change course, गांव वाले क्या करते हैं, वहां आके खेती शुरू कर देते हैं. So now what may be a claim of Nepal is under the possession of Indian people. So there, on Susta there can be some exchange. कुछ exchange हो सकता है सुस्ता पे. काला पानी पे exchange होने का possibility नहीं है because of its strategic significance. So now what is it that India says on this claim of Nepal? On this claim of Nepal? Nothing much. All right? झगड़ा करने की आदत नहीं है हमको. 2019 we started building a road for smooth passage of the Mansarovar, Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage in the Pithoragarh district. Nepal raised objection because this is close to Kalapani. 2020 the road was inaugurated. In that same year Nepal also, but अब domestic politics के अंदर ये बात होगी कि भाई India is occupying your territory, तो क्या करे? तो फिर Nepal's parliament passed a legislation whereby new map. So now Nepal has extended its claim to include Lipu Lake, Kalapani and Limpiadhura. So it had also become a matter of contention. Some people argued that there is the hand of third country China in this. Nepal is doing this because of China's instigation. Be that as it may. But at the government level we simply said, Ministry of External Affairs said that India's position on the border is consistent and well known. India's position on the border is consistent and well known. There is no question of accepting expanded claims by Nepal. Right? Our position is well known. इतना कहना काफी है ये कहने के लिए कि India is not accepting the expanded claims of Nepal. Similarly, India pointed out that the delineation of boundary between India and Nepal remains a continuing process. So we always talk about process, that it is a continuing process. So thereby what is solution? India says that any issue in this context must be discussed at appropriate bilateral forums and resolved in the spirit of good neighborliness. That is what India says. That is what India's position is. What is India's position? That India's position on the boundary is well known. Nepal's expanded claims are unfounded. The process of boundary negotiations between India and Nepal remains a continuing process, and any issue therein must be resolved bilaterally in the spirit of good neighborly relations. That is what India's position is, right? So first of all, there is no question on accepting any territorial claims, new territorial claims. But second of all, there is no question of making it an unnecessary issue. We are saying that we have differences. We are saying that these differences can be resolved in the spirit of good neighborliness, and we are saying that bilaterally we should be doing it. So that is what India is saying, right? Similarly, informally speaking, India and China had opened up the map, the Lipu Lake Pass for Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. So India would also say that when that happened, you did not object. Lipu Lake Pass is on the India-China border, right, which now Nepal is claiming. It is in the state of पास है तो उत्तराखंड में ही होगा ना, उत्तर प्रदेश में कोई पासेस हैं, बॉर्डर प्लेन है जनरली. सो हियर इज अनदर असाइनमेंट फॉर यू. ट्राई एंड आइडेंटिफाई मेजर पासेस ऑन द हिमालय, स्पेशली बिटवीन इंडिया एंड चाइना, है ना? तो दिस कैन ऑल्सो हेल्प यू इन द कॉन्टेक्स्ट ऑफ जियोग्राफी. Passes, mountain passes in India, the peninsular mountain passes are also there, right? for example, Palghat, etc. I am talking about Himalayan mountain passes. It comes in geography, but here I am hinting that it is also important in the context of relations with other countries, right? The Lipu Lake Pass is important because it's a passageway for Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. What is the other pass through which Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage passes or is carried out? आप सभी generally are quite excited about India. Do you know the other mountain pass through which Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage takes place? Have you heard of Nathula? कहाँ है Nathula? So that is what I'm saying, right? You will find major passes in the state of Jammu and Kashmir, Himalayan passes, in the state of Himachal Pradesh, in the state of Uttarakhand, in Sikkim and in Arunachal Pradesh. That's what I'm saying. Try and go and find out. So the Nathula Pass is also one or traditional route for Kailash Mansarovar pilgrimage. Lipu Lake Pass was opened later, right? So here we understood the border dispute. We understand that it's a continuing process. We understood the process of it. We understood whenever there is claim, extended claim, what India says or does, rather than making it a dispute. We understood that we will remember the pair of Kalapani and Mahakali, and we will remember the pair of Susta and Gandak. Why? For the purpose of preliminary examination. Similarly, जब भी इस तरह की कोई चीज आती है तो ये बेसिक है. लोकेशंस का नाम देख लो. लिम्पियाधुरा पास recently in news is located in, right? Lipu Lake Pass is located between. तो बहुत सारे लोग रिसर्च करने लगते हैं इस मैप पे कि नेपाल ने कहा है this is dispute is important, and they forget that ultimately Lipu Lake Pass is a pass of India and it is on the border of India and China, right? So for preliminary examination, joint level technical team 1981 strip maps, 98% of border is delineated on the maps. Process continues, and that is something that India is talking about, that let's talk about these things rather than making them a contentious issue, right? So this is where we will stop today. In the next class, what are we going to do? Is we'll simply wrap up Nepal, all right, with strategic concerns and way forward, and then majorly we'll talk in the next class about Sri Lanka, Maldives, and hopefully also SAARC and BIMSTEC, all right, SAARC and BIMSTEC. असाइनमेंट कोड क्या होगा? अब ये ब्यूरोक्रेसी की बातें आप मुझसे मत पूछिए. असाइनमेंट कोड क्या हो बता दीजिएगा आप. है ना, आप लिख लीजिएगा, अभी आपको मौका नहीं मिला. बट आई वुड सजेस्ट राइट इट एज क्विकली एज पॉसिबल. जितना जल्दी हो पाए उतना जल्दी लिखिए इसको. और आई वुड ऑल्सो सजेस्ट कि अब थोड़ा गूगल सर्च कर लो, पहले नहीं, क्लास के बीच में नहीं, अब, ताकि रेलेवेंट इंफॉर्मेशन पता होगी. नॉट टू मच इंफॉर्मेशन, स्टोरी प्लस इंफॉर्मेशन, दैट इज व्हाट यू शुड बी ट्राइंग टू डू. So thank you very much for your time and attention. We'll meet in the next class. We will continue with South Asia, and we will most probably wrap up complete South Asia in the next class.